So earlier this year, I walked into a tea shop in Tokyo and they wouldn't sell me a second tin. They said only one tin per person. Now, there was a little sign on the shelf, and the shopkeeper told me they started doing that the year before, 2025, and they still hadn't taken it down. So it seems like the matcha shortage isn't quite over yet. So I really wanted to look at the research and the data of the current state of the matcha shortage in 2026. My name is Christian. I run a tea brand called OnewithTea. And after many years of drinking tea, I decided to make tea my profession and my work, because when something changes your life or has such a big impact on your life, you at some point just want to share it with others. And that's kind of like what I am. And yeah, that's what One with Tea is for me. So, I'm excited to have you along the journey. But that's a long story. You can check that out more if you want to at our documentary, which is onewithtea.com/documentary. But for this one, let's get into what's really happening with matcha right now. So I spent 3 weeks this spring in Japan with the farmers and the producers who actually make matcha. And I came back wanting to tell this carefully, because most of what gets said about the shortage online is half right, half fear, half marketing. So I'll walk you through three things. What's actually happening in real numbers, including the auction data that just came this April and May, why it's happening, and what I think of all of this is quietly asking of us, the people who drink it, not as a crisis, as a moment in a much longer story. So here's what's true. Last year in 2025, the first matcha harvest set a record at auction at the auction in Kyoto. So the tencha, which is the leaf that gets ground into matcha, averaged about 8,200 yen a kilogram across the auction, roughly 1.7 times the year before. And that's the highest mark it's ever been seen, beating a record that stood since 2016, okay? And interesting to know about Japan and how tea pricing works is the whole auction system. And, different prefectures have different auctions and set different prices for different types of teas, which is, something very, just uniquely Japanese about the tea. And so the premium first flush grade, the best matcha actually comes from, didn't just rise, it nearly tripled from around 5,400 yen a kilo to over 14,000. And the hand-picked lots went for more than double their old record. Nobody in the trade had seen that tencha move like that before. So that was very interesting. And this spring, the new season opened even higher. So in Kagoshima, which overtook Shizuoka as the biggest tea producing region in 2025, in Kagoshima, it held its first auction April 6th, and the average came in about 60% above the year before, and around 6,500 yen a kilo. So the highest in over a decade. And with, then Uji opened on April 24th and had a hand-rolled gyokuro sold for 500,000 yen a kilogram, which is also a record. Now, gyokuro is a shaded tea, if you don't know, and so it goes through a similar production process where you need to cover the leaves to, be shaded before the leaf gets harvested. So very similar process to matcha, which is why that's a signal for matcha price moves as well. And the total trade value at the Kyoto and Uji market this season is projected to roughly double to around 10 billion yen, with tencha making about 90% of it. So that's, overall very interesting to see how tencha is really driving the market in Japan, because the demand for matcha, especially outside of Japan, is so big. So let's take a step back from the auctions. Japan's green tea exports in the latest fiscal year hit 13,100 tons. That's a 42% jump in a single year. And the value more than doubled to about 85 billion yen. And around 70% of that is actually matcha style powder tea. So, you can feel it on the ground when you're in Japan. Like shops in Tokyo with one tin per person limits, cafes in the US now sometimes waiting to get their premium matcha served to them. So, sometimes I would say cafes, they don't value matcha as much. For example, like a boba shop or some, a coffee shop that just has matcha on the menu that's not really as invested in matcha. They are already starting to look into alternatives from China and other countries, which is very interesting. China is catching up very fast. The quality in Japan is still, I would say, the highest. But China is catching up fast in terms of quality. So it remains interesting to see how it develops over the next coming years. So these are the numbers, and but the numbers are just, the symptom. Like, the more interesting question is really why. So there are four things stacked on top of each other. One, demand exploded, as you obviously or maybe have heard, that matcha went from a Japanese tea ceremony tradition to a global boom and staple in about 10 years. So lattes, baking, smoothies, every boba shop and cafe, wants to offer matcha now. And so the demand curve is steeper than anything Japanese tea has ever seen. Two, the supply just can't move that fast. So real matcha comes from tencha, shaded for around 3 weeks, picked once a year, and traditionally finished by hand, right? And a tea bush takes roughly 3 to 5 years from planting before it's really ready to produce. You can't just plant your way out of a shortage this season because it takes a couple of years, right? So to give you a sense of how slow it is, Japan produced a record amount of tencha in 2024, and it was still only around 5,300 tons for the whole country. So that's not really that much on the grand scheme of things, if you think about it. And on a recent visit, I watched a producer in Shizuoka put in a brand new tencha line, state of the art, and it adds maybe 30 tons of capacity a year. So this is just one example of, some of the investments that are being made around Japan to hold up with this structural lag of investment and catching up to the demand. And the third reason why there is a shortage is because people who grow tea are aging out. So according to Japan's agricultural census, the number of farms commercially growing tea fell from around 53,000 in the year 2000 to about 12,000 in the year 2020. So that's nearly 77% gone in 2 decades. The average Japanese farmer now is close to 68 years old, and more than half the tea farmers are over 65. I sat with some farmers this spring who, don't have anyone in the family who's going to take over the fields, and the young people, like whether it's their family or outsiders, aren't really exactly excited rushing back from the city to do this kind of work because it's hard, right? So, and it's not only farmers, like the chazen producers, the bamboo whisk, like it's still hand cut from a single stalk of bamboo by one craftsman, only 3 to 4 whisks from a stalk. And today there's only about a couple dozen chazen masters left in entire Japan. I mean, it's mind-boggling, and almost all of them on one village is Takayama, and a couple dozen. So that's really wild to think about, because a chazen from Japan, as a price comparison, costs about $40 retail versus one from China costs about $4 or $5 retail. So it's there's this I don't want to say competition, but there's this dynamic happening on the tea market where Japan doesn't have enough capacity and is kind of serving the top 20, top 30 now, maybe top 40 now, but it's shrinking because, China is catching up with chazen, with the matcha production, with everything, right? So it's going to be really interesting to observe in the coming years. And then reason number 4, why we still have a matcha shortage, or it's still being heavily, kind of impacted, is the Iran war between, US and Iran. So as of spring, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. And if you know that, it's a big energy chokehold, right? So Japan imports about 90% of its energy, and almost all of it is crude oil, around 90%. And 90% of that energy comes through that strait for Japan. and roughly a quarter to a third of the world's traded fertilizer normally moves through there too. So energy is up, fertilizer up, shipping is up, growing tea takes drying, firing, and it runs on oil and gas, and the fertilizers also matter. So the costs of production currently also being pressured when it comes to matcha. So the growing it, processing, shipping it out, like all these costs went up across Japan, and Japan imports more than 60% of its food calories, and a crisis like that raises food costs worldwide, including tea. So that's really the whole big picture. So demand is up, supply is slow, the growers retiring, the world is more expensive due to energy crisis right now through the Iran war. That's kind of all the levers that are pushing on matcha right now in Japan. But the math's only the surface. Like there's a more interesting story underneath, and I got to see some of it. And there's one more piece worth being honest about. Like China is now actually the world's largest matcha producer by volume, and is growing fast. Like provinces like Guizhou are planning to quadruple their output by the end of the decade. Now, a lot of that, especially in the commodity grades, isn't made the way top Japanese farms make it. There's a little bit less shading, there's later flush leaves, sometimes the whole leaf is ground up, they don't even devein, like take the veins out of the leaf, which is the whole process of making tencha. It's very interesting. So at the high end, the quality gap is real, even though some Chinese producers are getting generally good. And here's what's happening because of the shortage. A lot of cafes are quietly switching to the cheaper matcha because it's going into a milk drink anyway, and most people won't notice the difference once it's in a latte anyways, right? So more of the world's everyday matcha is going to come from China. That's just where the capacity is being built. I'm not saying that to scare you off. I'm just saying that to have you be aware, and because if you also care where your matcha comes from, this is the moment kind of to start thinking where it comes from and why would it matter for you, right? So let me tell you what the visit actually looked like, because it wasn't what I expected in Japan. In Uji, there were tea that has been cultivated for something like 800 years. I walked into the oldest tea shop in the world, and it's been standing there since 1160, right? So more than 850 years, still run by the same family, 20-some generations in it, and the conversations weren't about whether matcha is having a moment. They watched 1,000 moments come and go. They were about how to hold the standard while the world kind of pulls the leaf in a million different directions. So that's a lot of the ground, like the in the trenches question a lot of people ask, right? So that's a real question that people sit with right now. It's like more tea at a lower quality, or hold the line on quality with less to go around, right? In Kagoshima, which passed Shizuoka in a couple of years to become Japan's top region, it's really interesting because they showed me the matcha facility and tencha facility, and they were already planning a bit more. So that's the real state of matcha in 2026. Not a disaster, more of a turning point, right? The price went up because the world finally wanted what a small number of patient people in Japan have been quietly making by hands for centuries. And there was never, going to be enough of that to go around anyways, so fast, right? So if this moment asks any of us, if this moment asks anything of us, I think it's simple. Slow down with your cup, know where it came from, and honor the tea leaf. Spending time with Japanese farmers has really shown me of what an art it is to grow tea and what goes into it. So appreciate where your tea comes from. It's really an honor. And that's the whole thing that tea has been trying to teach the whole time. I feel it's part of becoming patient and more centered. So I'm grateful for what tea has done to my life, right? And I'm genuinely excited about where it's going. So my wish for everyone here is always, I wish you something delicious in your cup, and may you become one with tea, one with yourself. Thanks for being here.